At 11:37 hours on July 12, 1943, Senior Sergeant Dmitry the Wrench Volkov was no longer a man. He was the target of 60 tons of furious German steel. His T-34 76th 1942 model was partially concealed in a shallow valley, 400 meters from the village of Prokhorovka, the epicenter of the largest tank engagement in history. The Russian steppe, usually serene, had become an inferno of black smoke and red dust. The sound of the German Tigers' 88mm guns boomed like a giant blacksmith hammering metal, and the smell of burning diesel and powder flooded the fighting compartment. Volkov, a 24-year-old face streaked with soot, had his right eye glued to the periscope sight. But what was killing him wasn't smoke or the panic of his crew. It was the silence of his own gun. The closest Panther, a Panzerkampfwagen V, straight off the German production lines, was only 350 meters away and advancing methodically. Its high-velocity 75mm rounds tore through the air. Volkov's T-34 was positioned for a perfect shot, but there was a catastrophic problem. The manual turret Trevor system had locked up. A lateral hit from an artillery fragment 15 minutes earlier had slightly warped the turntable ring and jammed the emergency hydraulic system. They were tactically immobilized. To fire at the Panther advancing from the right, Volkov would have to move the entire tank, a slow, suicidal maneuver in the open battlefield of Kursk. He had no more than 60 seconds before the Panther turned them into a funeral pyre. Dmitry Volkov was not an infantry hero. He was an engineer. Before the war, in the Urals, he was known as the best tractor mechanic in the oblast, capable of keeping machines running with improvised spare parts made from scrap. This mentality of improvisation, or what German soldiers would come to call Russian survival engineering, was what led him to the 181st Guards Tank Brigade, a unit viewed with distrust by the high command. The 181st was not composed of fervent ideologues. They were men undesirable in the regular system, ex-mechanics with problems, convicted of minor offenses, mostly for stealing parts to improve their own machines, and those considered too independent for Stalin's strict military rules. The Red Army saw that independence as insubordination. Colonel Kochev, commander of the 181st, saw it as a resource. Kochev knew that in a war of attrition where equipment constantly failed and supply lines collapsed, he didn't need men who followed the manual. He needed men who could rewrite the manual with a screwdriver and a blowtorch under enemy fire. Volkov, nicknamed the Wrench for his legendary ability to dismantle and reassemble anything in minutes, was the epitome of this new kind of crewman. He had personally modified his T-34's V2 diesel engine to run on a dirtier fuel mix, allowing his tank to operate up to 25% longer than standard, albeit at constant risk of fire. Now all of his survival engineering would be tested not against bad weather or internal mechanical failure, but against the pinnacle of German engineering. SS the 2nd Panzer Corps under von Hauser was pouring a rain of projectiles onto the line. Volkov's company had begun the day with 12 T-34s. By 11:30 hours, only 7 remained. The Panther stopped at 320 meters. The T-34's gunner, Semyon, yelled, his voice a high thread over the roar of battle. "They're aiming, Sergeant. We're stuck." Volkov was out of the sight picture. He had opened the commander's hatch, exposing half his body to the inferno outside to get a clear view of the turret ring. The Panther fired. The shell whistled so close that Volkov could feel the displaced air pressure. It didn't hit the T-34, but impacted 20 meters away, sending up a column of dirt and debris raining down onto the armored hull. Semyon, the electric traverse is inoperative. The manual system locked up. We've got 30 seconds, Max. We need a field adjustment now, Volkov snarled, crawling back inside the fighting compartment. He had 2 options, both insane, both demanding that he defy the laws of physics and survival under fire. Option 1. Under fire, open the access cover to the traverse mechanism, use a steel bar, a 5-minute effort, and try to free the turntable ring by brute force. Risk: 100% chance of being hit before finishing. Option 2. Use the instability of the battlefield itself. Volkov remembered a trick learned from fixing tractors stuck in winter mud. Looking at his driver, Ivan, Volkov made a gesture that seemed completely counterintuitive in a tank battle. He didn't order Ivan to fall back. He ordered Ivan to advance into danger. "Ivan," Volkov shouted, nearly breaking his vocal cords. "Advance 15 meters, Ivan, and find a crater. A big one. Quick." The driver, used to following the strange but always effective orders of the wrench, engaged first gear. The T-34, a moving target, erupted from behind a burnt haystack. The Panther readjusted its aim. 20 seconds remained. They were running straight toward the mouth of the German gun in the hope that an engineering defect and a violent collision could fix what battle had broken. Volkov's suicidal run had only begun. He knew that to fix the tank, he needed to break it again, in the right way. Time was the enemy, and the next hole in the ground would be his only tool. Volkov's order, "Advance 15 meters, find a crater," was the craziest thing driver Ivan had ever heard, but he obeyed without hesitation. At 11:38 hours, the T-34, with its wide steel tracks, roared forward, hitting roughly 30 kilometers per hour. The German Panther, seeing the T-34 moving erratically in its direction, miscalculated the trajectory. The German gunner fired a second round. The 75mm shell, PZGR, 39-40 seconds, ripped through the space where the T-34 had been just a second earlier, ricocheting off the packed earth 10 meters to the left, and continued howling over the heads of Russian infantry, bringing up the rear. Inside the T-34, the smell of ozone and the vibration of the near miss were deafening. Volkov stood, balancing on Ivan's knees. His focus wasn't on the Panther, it was on the terrain. "Ivan, 10 o'clock, the howitzer crater." 10 meters ahead, there was a 3-meter-wide crater, the result of a heavy artillery shell, possibly 152 millimeters, that had detonated minutes earlier. The hole was deep enough to swallow the T-34's front tracks. "We'll hit the left edge first. Fast. Prepare for full stop." Volkov's logic was pure survival engineering, distilled from years of fixing agricultural machinery. He couldn't lever out the 26-ton turret ring, but he could use the tank's own mass and speed. If he struck the crater edge off balance, driving the left track violently into the hole before the right, the rotational inertia would be transmitted to the turret. It was the only way to apply enough pinpoint force to dislodge the jammed fitting. A 50/50th gamble. Either the ring would free itself, or the impact would deform the chassis and turn the T-34 into permanent scrap. At 11:39 hours, the T-34 struck the crater at an oblique angle. The impact was cataclysmic. The tank stopped dead with a crash of steel and dirt. The negative G force slammed the gunner and loader into the front wall, and Volkov hit his head on the turret roof, nearly blacking out. The fighting compartment filled with dust and that eerie silence that follows a massive trauma. The engine stalled. The silence was broken only by the high-pitched ring in their ears and the crew's ragged breathing. "Everyone okay?" Volkov gasped, wiping blood from his forehead. "Driver, restart the engine. Semyon, load AP round." The radio was hissing. Even struggled to restart the V2 engine. Outside, the Panther was now at approximately 250 meters. The German commander saw the T-34 had stopped and likely assumed it was knocked out. The Panther began moving laterally, preparing for a shot into the vulnerable side of the turret. Volkov didn't wait for the engine. He climbed over the gunner's seat, grabbing the manual traverse wheel that had been locked up. He applied brutal, desperate pressure. The wheel groaned, At first, no movement. The turret ring was fully jammed. Volkov clenched his eyes shut, gritting his teeth. He pushed with every ounce of strength, recalling years of battling rusted axles and frozen gears on winter tractors. Then, he felt it. A small crack. Not something breaking, but two stuck metal surfaces separating. The wheel turned. Not smoothly. It was rough, requiring constant force to overcome the warped metal, but it turned. The turret was back. It works, Volkov shouted, sliding into Gunner Semyon's seat, who was still dazed. Ivan, engine, we've got a shot. Semyon, load APC, quick. The V2 engine coughed and sputtered. Time was running out. The Panther completed its lateral maneuver, exposing its frontal armor, lining up for a perfect side shot. Volkov looked through the periscope. The Panther loomed large in the sight, an easy target, but the T-34's awkward angle, now half buried in the crater, made gun elevation difficult. The German commander was about to give the order to fire. Volkov felt the T-34 vibrate as Ivan finally restarted the engine with a full-throated roar. That gave Volkov the stability and power he needed. He adjusted the sight to aim directly at the Panther's frontal glacis plate. At that distance, a T-34 had little chance of penetrating the thick armor, but they had to try. One shot, their lives depended on it. The loader, arms shaking, finally shoved the 76mm AP round into the breech. Ready. Fire, Volkov shouted, pulling the trigger at exactly 11:40 hours. The ZIS-5 gun erupted, and the recoil unexpectedly jolted the T-34's rear end out of the crater. The 76mm shell closed the 250 meters in a fraction of a second. Volkov saw the hit. Not a clean penetration, but a violent ricochet near the Panther's turret joint. The hit was strong enough to stun the German crew, and critically, damage the gun's rangefinder. The Panther was temporarily blind and stunned, but not destroyed. Volkov's hack had bought them time, but the main tactical problem, surviving the Tiger and the Panther, had only just begun. They were alive because of a controlled crash. Now they had to move. The T-34 was out of the crater, but not out of German sights. Volkov's shot at 1,140 hours had only been a warning, but it worked like a tactical flashbang. The stunned Panther fired back blindly, its 75mm round, exploding harmlessly 50 meters to the left. However, the thunder of the Soviet gun and the T-34's Z movement drew attention from the most dangerous element in the sector, a Tiger I, PZKPFW VIAUSF H1, operated by veterans of the 503rd Heavy Tank Battalion, hidden behind a scorched copse 900 meters southeast. The Tiger was a 56-ton precision machine, armed with the dreaded 88mm KWK-36, a gun that could pierce the T-34 at nearly any angle, even at a full kilometer. At 11:41 hours, Volkov barked. Full throttle, use the smoke. The T-34 surged forward, diving into the black smoke cloud left by the earlier explosion. They needed cover from the blinded Panther and, more critically, from the Tiger's sights. The Tiger's turret, slow but relentless, began to turn, its high-quality optics sweeping through the haze for the Russian tank. Volkov had bought maybe 90 seconds of life. Semyon, load another AP. Ivan, take us to the dry riverbed. We need flank cover, Volkov ordered. As they moved, the internal tension in the T-34 was suffocating. Though the turret traverse had been restored, it was still unreliable. Volkov tested a 360-degree turn. The system groaned and locked again at 210 degrees. The initial dislodging force had worked, but not cleanly. Traverse is seizing again, the loader warned, and slowing down. If we stop now, we're done. Volkov studied the makeshift tactical map taped inside the turret. They were in a transition zone between the Soviet defensive line and the German armored wedge assault. The original plan had been to hold position and force the German infantry into the open. With a Tiger lurking, that plan was suicidal. Volkov's tactical dilemma was clear. Dilemma: stay on the front line, keeping the Tiger in sight, but risk being killed by an 88mm round due to slow turret movement. Or pull back to support lines to repair the turret, a process that would take hours and pull them out of the fight, effectively abandoning comrades on the front. At that moment, the engineer overruled the soldier. The 181st Brigade didn't retreat for slow repairs. The solution wouldn't come from the rear, but from invention. Volkov needed a permanent fix under fire. The root cause was a broken retaining bolt in the turret ring. Metal fragments were intermittently lodging in the traverse track, like stones in a gear. The metal was too hot to touch. Reaching the bolt meant exposing himself again. Even, Volkov called. Pull up near that barrier wall. The barrier wall was a pile of rusted rail tracks and wooden sleepers, used by the Russians to reinforce an abandoned bunker about 150 meters away. They stopped the T-34 against that barricade at 11:43 hours. The wall offered modest protection from small arms fire and, crucially, blocked the Tiger's turret from most firing angles. Ivan, keep the engine hot. If I shout, go forward. Semyon, cover me. I'm using the hammer. Volkov pulled on his leather gloves and grabbed the standard-issue iron sledgehammer. He had an insane plan. Hammer the top of the turret ring to shake loose or destroy the lodged fragment. He opened the commander's hatch. The Russian steppe, thick with the smell of death, trembled under the noon heat and relentless battle. He leaned out, hammer in hand. But the Tiger wasn't patient. The German commander had finally cleared the smoke and spotted the partially exposed T-34. At 11:44 hours, the Tiger fired the 88mm. The shot sounded like nothing Volkov had ever heard. A dry, thunderous crack, followed by the howl of steel death. The round didn't hit the T-34. It struck the rail barricade directly in front. The explosion from the he-shell was monumental. Steel rails weighing hundreds of kilos launched skyward like matchsticks. Volkov was thrown back inside. The blast and shockwave were so strong, the radio antenna was torn off. The T-34 shook like a toy. Miraculously, the armor and distance saved them. But the hammer had slipped from Volkov's hand and wedged itself into the turret as traverse mechanism. Instead of fixing the issue, he had catastrophically worsened it. They could no longer move the turret at all. They were stuck with a hammer jamming their gun, and the Tiger was adjusting its aim. Volkov looked at the bloody wound on his hand. He had 1 minute to remove that hammer before the Tiger fired again. The cost of his warning shot had been the loss of turret mobility, and they were now a sitting target. At 11:45 hours, the T-34 was effectively disarmed and immobilized, pressed up against a ruined bunker 850 meters from a Tiger eye that now had both the distance and the angle for a kill shot. The 5-kilogram sledgehammer was jammed tightly between the gear and the turret ring. We're completely stuck. The hammer's blocking everything. The loader, Semyon, was on the verge of a breakdown. Volkov didn't respond right away. His focus wasn't on the imminent danger, but on the mechanical problem. The metal, warped by the Tiger's 88mm blast, had contracted, locking the hammer in a death grip. If he tried to pull on the wooden handle, it would snap, leaving the steel head jammed permanently. He needed 3 things, and he needed them in 60 seconds. Leverage, lubrication, and thermal shock. Ivan, keep the engine at 2,000 RPM. We want the tank as hot as possible. We're cooking in here. That helps. Semyon, give me the emergency diesel oil hose and the water canteen. The water bottle was a half-full aluminum canteen, the standard-issue field supply. Volkov's plan was brutal, simple, and all physics. The lubrication would reduce friction between the hot metal and the hammer. The thermal shock, splashing cold water on a specific part of the overheated turret ring, would cause microcontraction in the steel, just enough to free the jammed hammer. He opened the commander's hatch again, exposing himself. He could see the dust cloud kicked up by the Tiger's last shell. They were reloading. The next shot would come in 30 seconds. Volkov poured the thick emergency diesel oil onto the contact point between the hammer and turret ring. The grease sizzled instantly. Lubrication alone wasn't enough. He needed surgical cooling. With his left hand, Volkov gripped the hammer's handle. With his right, he poured the canteen water precisely along the edge of the turret ring, 10 centimeters from the jail. Steam erupted in a dramatic white hiss. The metal contraction was tiny, maybe millimeters, but Volkov knew it was enough. Now or never. Using the technique that earned him the name, the wrench, Volkov didn't pull the hammer out. Instead, he pushed it in slightly to loosen the friction at the outer edge, and with a quick diagonal twist, rotated the wooden handle. Clang! The hammer flew from the mechanism and clanged to the steel floor inside the tank. The turret was free. All of this had taken 25 seconds. At 11:46 hours, the Tiger, now at 850 meters, fired. Traverse right, now! Volkov yelled, but the Tiger had already launched its shot. Volkov had no time to re-aim. Driver even executed a final maneuver, a move he'd only ever seen Volkov do. Instead of bracing for impact, he hit the throttle and jerked the tank hard left. The T-34 lunged at speed. The 88mm shell hit the spot where they'd been a second earlier. The He round exploded with enough force to shift the surrounding air, but they were still alive. But Ivan's sharp turn wasn't just evasion. Volkov had instructed him to use the slope ahead to 50 meters away for a running shot. With the turret now functional, though still rough, Volkov took control of the gun. The Tiger, assuming its last shot had hit, wasn't expecting an immediate counterattack. The T-34 was barreling along a 45-degree incline, rocking violently, nearly impossible conditions for a shot. But the speed and angle gave Volkov the elevation he needed. Semyon, he, not AP. The ammo choice was another survival engineering call. Volkov knew that even at 50 meters, he couldn't penetrate the Tiger's frontal armor. But the Tiger had a weakness: its optics and the 88mm gun itself. A 76mm high-explosive round would cause concussive damage and fragmentation. At 11:47 hours, the T-34 fired. The He shell struck the muzzle brake of the Tiger's 88mm. The explosion didn't. T damaged the barrel directly, but the shockwave and shrapnel wrecked the elevation system and shattered the gunner's primary scope. The Tiger eye was blind. Its cannon was stuck at 0 elevation. The German beast couldn't fire at Volkov anymore. Russian survival engineering had once again outsmarted German design, using grease and cold water instead of replacement parts. But the danger wasn't gone. The Panther was regrouping, and the blinded Tiger was now enraged, turning blindly, seeking anything to crush. The fight was far from over. With the Tiger eye temporarily disabled, Volkov gained the most precious commodity on the battlefield: time and positioning. At 11:48 hours, the T-34, still moving, its turret rough but operational, completed a tactical semicircle. They didn't retreat. Instead, Volkov ordered Evan to push toward a low hill, one that gave them a clear line of sight to the Panther PZ KPFWV. The Panther was busy trying to flank the Russian line, unaware the Tiger was blind. Semyon, now, load armor piercing. The Panther, about 400 meters away, exposed its left flank during the maneuver. At that range, the T-34's 76mm gun had a real chance against the Panther's side armor. Volkov didn't miss. His shot, fired at 11:49 hours, punched through just below the turret ring, directly into the ammo rack. The result was instant and violent. The Panther lurched to the left, flames bursting from its turret. What remained of the German crew scrambled out in panic. Senior Sergeant Dmitry, the wrench, Volkov had destroyed a Panther and disabled a Tiger in under 15 minutes using a plan that involved dropping his own tank into a crater emergency grease and a canteen of cold water. Tank combat continued for hours that day, but the disabling of the Tiger and the destruction of the Panther broke the main thrust of the German wedge in that sector. The 181st Guards Tank Brigade, made up of outcasts and improvisational engineers, held the line. They took heavy losses but prevented a Soviet collapse. Volkov, exhausted but alive, finally managed to complete a permanent turret repair that night, under the flickering light of a handheld torch, using a bent piece of railway track as a makeshift replacement part. He and Colonel Kochev both knew that the victory at Kursk wasn't won only by numbers or ideology, but by the ability of a single T-34 crew to rewrite the rules of mechanics under pressure. That T-34, repaired inside with diesel oil, cold water, and a sledgehammer, would continue to fight for another 6 months. The story of Dmitry Volkov and his survival engineering on July 12, 1943, is a reminder that war is won not only through brutal tactics, but ingenious invention, and that often the true heroes are the ones the military tried to discard. He proved that in the desperation of Kursk, human ingenuity was the most powerful weapon. If this story of Senior Sergeant Volkov and his survival engineering at the Battle of Kursk moved you, don't click away just yet. Hit the like button now and share this story with someone who needs to hear about the tenacity and improvisation of these men. It's crucial to our mission. Subscribe and turn on notifications. We publish new, untold World War II stories every week, and you won't want to miss them. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Are you in the US, UK, Canada, Australia, or somewhere else in our global community? And let us know. Did anyone in your family serve in World War II? You are part of keeping these memories alive. Volkov and the men of the 181st Guards Tank Brigade paid the price in 1943. All we're asked to do is remember. Never forget.